Welcome to Alliance webinar on doing business in South America. I am Jacob Stein. I'm an Alliance partner in Los Angeles, California, and my practice focuses on international taxation and cross-border business transactions. With me today are two of my very good friends, Javier Canosa. Javier is a corporate and M&A attorney in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and Luiz Hoffman. Luiz is also corporate and M&A attorney, but in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I have known both Luiz and Javier for some time. We've done business together, and these are two of the best corporate and M&A lawyers in South America. Both of them have very extensive experience representing foreign clients, doing business in South America, including US clients who are doing some sort of either direct foreign investment in Argentina or Brazil, or engaging in a joint venture transaction with a local partner. I'm sure you would love to hear more from Luiz and Javier, and they will have the majority of the time during this webinar. And I'm just going to take a few minutes to set the stage. So in our practice here in LA, we represent a lot of US businesses that do cross-border business transactions. Sometimes it's in the form of a direct investment in a foreign country, including launching a business in a foreign country. Sometimes it's in the form of a joint venture with a local partner. And as I was preparing for today's presentation, I remembered an interesting client anecdote from a few years ago. We had a client some years ago who was in the diaper business, right? They sold diapers for babies, and they wanted to enter the Venezuela market. It was a big market, and apparently at that time there were no disposable diapers being sold in Venezuela. Women were still washing, cloth diapers by hand. So our client rushed to market. They did, some due diligence, kind of the typical due diligence you would do in a case like this. And their diapers appeared on the store shelves across Venezuela. And they sat on those shelves as if they were nailed in place. And the diapers were not selling. And they could not figure out why the diapers were not selling. I mean, this is a great invention. A disposable diaper makes your life easier. At some point, a local distributor or a local salesperson approached our client and said, we've noticed you guys are pushing your product in Venezuela and it's not selling. Can we make a suggestion? Well, what's the suggestion? Well, Venezuela is a much poorer country than the United States. In the United States, it is common to buy diapers in a pack of 18 or 24 or even greater. In Venezuela, that's a bit expensive. Have you considered selling your disposable diapers in a set of 3 or maybe 6 diapers? And our client did the calculation and decided that, it's worth it for them to give it a try. And they brought these much smaller packages of disposable diapers to Venezuela, and it proceeded to sell like candy. You have to know your local market. You have to know somebody on the ground. And that's probably, when you do cross-border business transactions, whether it's a joint venture or direct investment, that's sort of the key point we try to educate our business partners and our clients about. You really have to have a great local partner. And in my experience, it's so important to have a great local law firm. In foreign markets, you certainly do not know what you do not know, right? And there's a whole wide world of things you do not know that can hurt you. All sorts of risks you may be exposed to that you do not even know that they exist. Like, what is legal in the local market that you are entering? Will your intellectual property be safe once you enter that market? What would be the best tax structure? Are there different cities or provinces that you should focus on, maybe because of various tax or economic incentives? Are there economic incentive zones that you're going into? What are the restrictions on foreign direct investment in the country you're entering? Diapers are probably not restricted in any country, but maybe certain other industries are restricted from foreign ownership. There are currency regulations or currency controls in place that will prevent you from getting your profits back out of the country that you invested in? What are the local employment laws like? How protective are they of you? How protective will they be of the employees that you hire? Do you need to be concerned with local antitrust laws? So there's all these questions, and there are, believe me, many, many more questions, and you need to have a really good local partner who understands those questions, who has experience in doing due diligence for foreigners doing business in their country and helping negotiate a joint venture. So we want a law firm that's not only knowledgeable, it's also really well connected, can make the right introductions to the right players in their country or city, and perhaps some political clout, right? In a lot of countries outside of the United States, being politically connected can make all the difference, right? Especially locally connected. And these are some of the reasons why I so much enjoy working with Luiz, who is based again in Sao Paulo, and Javier, who is based in Buenos Aires, and structuring these transactions. So for our US clients, what are the US sort of legal issues they need to be concerned with? Well, one is, other than conducting this due diligence for which we need a good local partner, what is the optimal legal structure? Meaning, are we going to run this transaction, this investment and joint venture through a US entity? Are we going to set up an entity in the country where we will be doing business? Are we going to set up an entity somewhere in the offshore zone, right? And then enter the country through that offshore entity? If we're doing a joint venture, is that being legally formed in the country of operations, outside of the country of operations? Are we setting up a parent subsidiary structure or a brother sister structure? So all sorts of issues we need to work our way through. And I don't think there is ever a right or a wrong answer in many of these structuring decisions, just depending on the deal you're doing, depending on the country you're in, depending on perhaps on who your investors are, different structures would make sense. For US investors, what probably makes the greatest impact on determining just how to structure their outbound investment into South America, or really into any other market as well, will be taxation. How will the United States tax whatever it is you do overseas? Now, obviously, the foreign countries will tax you as well, right? If you're doing business in Argentina, and Javier will discuss that later, Argentina will tax you, right? If you're doing business in Brazil, Brazil will tax you. And I will allow Javier and Luiz to discuss that. But how will the United States tax you, right? And the United States does tax foreign transactions. So we do have concepts like the controlled foreign corporation, right? This is when a US person, and this can be a natural person or a corporate entity, a US person owns and controls a foreign corporation, and it always has to do with the corporation, right? So if you're doing business outside of the United States, either directly or through some sort of a partnership, then the United States will just tax you on the earnings you generate outside the United States, right? As US taxpayers, we are taxed on our worldwide earnings. So whether it's through a US corporate player that's doing business, let's say, directly in Argentina, or we've set up a partnership in Chile, whatever earnings we generate, the income just flows through and is reported in our income tax returns here in the United States, and we are currently taxed on that income. The only time that changes is when we set up a foreign corporation to transact business through, because now we are a shareholder in a corporation, and as a shareholder in a corporation, generally speaking, we do not get taxed until the dividend is paid out, right? Until a distribution is made from the corporation. But corporate earnings do not flow through to shareholders, at least with foreign corporations. So in the early 60s, the United States introduced a tax regime known as Subpart F of the Internal Revenue Code. And Subpart F of the Internal Revenue Code aims at US operations outside of the United States that are transacted through foreign corporations. in an effort to fight deferral of foreign earnings, right? So when you are doing business outside of the United States through a foreign corporation, the concern is that you will generate earnings overseas and you will not pay out a dividend currently. And if you're not paying a dividend currently, the United States is not able to tax you currently, right? The United States cannot tax a foreign corporation because this foreign corporation is not doing business in the United States, so we have no jurisdiction over that foreign corporation. And the shareholders are generally not taxed until the dividend is paid to them. So Subpart F was introduced to look for when we have an offshore corporate structure that has a business purpose behind it, or when the purpose of the structure is tax deferral. So when the structure have a business purpose behind it, then the United States does allow us to defer our foreign earnings. When the purpose of the structure is tax deferral, then deferral is not allowed. And there are all sorts of mechanisms that our legal system, that our tax system has, that is intended to look for these sort of business purpose type structures. So we will look at what is the ownership of the foreign corporation. For example, if we have a foreign corporation in Brazil, in Chile, or in Germany, wherever, that is 100% owned by a US person, again, natural or corporate, then that foreign corporation will be treated as a controlled foreign corporation, and most likely the earnings that that foreign corporation generates will flow through to the US shareholders, and they will be currently taxed on their foreign earnings. But if you have a foreign corporation that is not controlled by a US person, meaning that the US person does not have more than 50% of vote and value, then you do not have current taxation. So, you know, this very short introduction I'm giving you is well beyond the full presentation on Subpart F and controlled foreign corporation rules. And on our website, you can see much more detailed presentations on inbound and outbound taxation topics. This would fall under outbound taxation for US taxpayers. So if you go on alliantlaw.com, Alliant is spelled with one L, you will see lots and lots of recordings on various topics. And you can delve more into how the United States taxes US taxpayers who are doing business outside of the United States. But for now, I want to leave it at that. And just one final point, when we are doing business overseas, it is very important to know whether the country we are doing business with does or does not have an income tax treaty with the United States. It so happens that the United States does not have income tax treaties either with Argentina or Brazil. As a matter of fact, the only country in South America, and I think this will be very surprising to most American listeners, that we have an income tax treaty is Venezuela. And I guess we used to have much better relations with Venezuela than we do today. But we do not have income tax treaties with other South American countries. What does that mean? It means that we do need to be concerned about double taxation of income, right? Because as I said, if we're doing business in, let's say, Argentina, Argentina will tax that income, and then perhaps the United States will also tax that income. And that could be very, very problematic for our clients. So certainly in the United States, we have the foreign tax credit that sometimes solves that problem and gives us a dollar for dollar credit for any foreign taxes we may have paid. But that credit is not always available. And certainly when we are setting up the structure, we have to make sure that we will get to take the advantage of the foreign tax credit because an income tax treaty is not available. There may be also all sorts of withholding issues in both directions. And this also impacts where specifically we set up the venture or the inbound legal entity. Do we set it up in an offshore zone because there is no tax treaty to begin with? Or do we set it up directly in the country where we're doing business? If, let's say, we're doing business in Venezuela, because of the income tax treaty, likely will be much more advantageous to have a legal structure directly in Venezuela. But for Argentina and Brazil, might not make that much of a difference. So with that, I'm going to conclude my brief presentation on the issues for Americans from a US point of view when they're doing business in South America. And I'm going to let my colleagues, Javier Canosa from Argentina and Luiz Hoffman from Brazil, take over. Again, I'm Jacob Stein in the Los Angeles office of Alliant, and thank you so much for listening. Javier, would you please take over?
Well, thank you, and welcome everyone who's behind your screens. Thank you, Jacob, and thank you, Natasha, for setting up this webinar. It's my first webinar for Alliant. I'm very happy to be doing this, and I hope you enjoy it. I will talk to you briefly about Argentina and how to structure business in Argentina. I will tell you what's going on, what are the current topics, and how you can best advise your clients on doing business in this part of the world. We just had a G20 meeting in Argentina, apparently a very successful one. And apparently Mr. Trump and Xi Jinping have agreed to ease the trade restrictions. So hopefully there will be a period of huge trade expansion all over the world. So without further ado, I will begin. My first slide, I imagine you've all heard of Argentina, but we used to be one of the richest countries in the world. We used to be among the 10th largest GDP per head in the world. After that period, that was up until 1930. After that, we had a long streak of bad governments, populist governments, and now we are probably number 56. Still, it's a high-income economy, according to World Bank statistics, and it's Latin America, third largest economy, and the second largest after Brazil in South America. I would also like to thank by the way, I forgot, I would also like to thank my co-host, Luiz Hoffman, for also sharing with me this webinar. So for those of you who haven't come here, it's a very rich in natural resources. We have the largest lithium reserves in the world, apparently. We have oil, gas, agriculture, the four climates and everything. Our population is highly literate, although poverty has been growing for a while. Almost 30% of the population is poor, but this brings a nice gap for growth, I think. But anyway, the population is highly literate. It's a very export-oriented economy in the agricultural sector. We produce food for 400 million inhabitants, and we have only 40 million. And we have a large industrial base of the, cars. We are, one of the 27 car producers in the world. We have all the white, the fridges and the ovens and things like that. And currently, we have huge opportunities in the renewable sector, like solar energy, wind, and so on. The oil and gas, the shale gas reserves of Vaca Muerta are also supposed to be one of the largest in the world. Agriculture, still prices of farms are cheap, according to other economies. And real estate also provides some opportunities for growth, bearing in mind the laggard state of our economy for the past few years. In the beginning of 2001, we had a large economic crisis. This large economic crisis triggered a whole movement of sort of populist government led by the Kirchner administration. And But by one of these, lucky chances, in October 2015, Macri, a moderate, not populist president, came into power. He won by a very, very short margin the runoff election, but that brought about a new government and a new period of hope for Argentina. Although this administration, in place since December 10th, 2015, has been trying to reaccommodate and revamp Argentina in the world scenario. So that you can have an idea, we were totally disconnected from the financial world for 15 years due to the debt crisis. We had unpaid debt for 15 years, and this administration began lifting the exchange controls, paying the holdouts, and sorting out that problem. So they are trying to do this movement in the right direction. Of course, we are not totally immune from crisis because the world is still a complicated place, and we haven't managed yet to sort out a few things. I think probably the most important one is inflation. And financial markets are still wobbling a little bit. It's becoming it's been difficult, but we are still very optimistic about the future and the re-election, hopefully, of Mr. Macri in 19. It's for sure that there will be no more populist government in Argentina. I will now use a few minutes to tell you about our political system. We are a constitutional republic modeled after the US Constitution, although our legal system is a continental one. So we have codes: the civil code, civil and commercial code, the criminal code, mining code, and so on. We have, of course, the three branches: the executive, the legislative, and the judicial power. Politically, the country is divided in 23 provinces and many municipalities within each province. Each province is a very similar structure as the federal government. This is executive, legislative, and judicial. The head of the executive is the president, the head of the judicial is the Supreme Court, and the legislative is divided in two chambers. One, the senators are elected, are representing the provinces, three senators for each province, and the deputies, they represent the people. So it's like one big district. So this is a little bit about Argentina's history and Argentina's legal system. I will now mention the way of selling your products and services into Argentina, and what is the best way to structure this. There are two ways, I would say, there are two basic forms of selling goods and services into Argentina. The first one is with the local presence, incorporate a company in Argentina, very, very easy. And the second one is by appointing someone, executing an agreement with a local Argentine company that will sell or distribute your products. For the first type, when you want to set up your own business structure in Argentina, historically, the most commonly used type of business structures have been the corporation, the Sociedad Anónima, which is, has shares, the board of directors, the shares, it's called Sociedad Anónima because the shares used to be nominal. They were not nominal. So there was no central registry of ownership of the shares. This was terminated a few years ago, 1992. And the limited liability company, or Sociedad de Responsabilidad Limitada, which is used for simpler structures. It's much simpler. It has a manager. Partners are described in the bylaws, and it has a much more simpler and easy to run structure. And finally, we have the branch of the foreign company, which is the same branch, the same foreign entity registering in the Argentine Public Register of Commerce and before the tax authorities, and executing business activities like any other local company. The corporation was always, envisaged, was thought for larger enterprises, whereas for banks, for insurance companies, for publicly listed companies, and so on. Whereas the LLC or the SRL was thought for smaller undertakings, like local small shops, small and medium enterprises, and so on. Like I said, the LLC, is simpler to run, but in either case, the LLC or the corp, you need to register the partners, the shareholders in the case of the corp, and the partners in the case of the LLC before the Public Registry of Commerce. This registry was very simple in the beginning, and it became a little bit more complex, where you have to, prove who's the UBO, the ultimate beneficial owner, and explain, what kind of company, what kind of activities the foreign company is doing overseas. In other words, they're trying to see that there's no Argentine resident hiding behind the foreign company. The branch, like I said, must also be registered before the Public Registry of Commerce and the tax authorities, and will be considered a local company for tax purposes. So, it will pay income tax at the same rate. It will be the same local company for tax purposes. Now, the branch may also be assigned with certain capital if required by law, or if needed, like if the branch is a bank or an insurance company, or develops an activity that requires the assignment, the attribution of certain capital, the branch may be assigned the capital and register before the Public Registry of Commerce. Now there's a new entity, this administration, aware of the increased regulation we had in the past 15 years, where we passed, according to ease on doing businesses indexes of the World Bank, from place number 50 to place number 150 in the ease of doing business, and any economic freedom ranking, Heritage Foundation, or any of those rankings, we have been less free in economic terms. This administration has been trying to open up and simplify the procedures. Now, to do that, I think they took a right approach, which was, we're not going to change the corporate law, because this will require a lot of negotiation and so on. But no one is against the entrepreneurs, and we want to foster entrepreneurship. So they enacted a venture capital law, an entrepreneurship law, and they created a new type of company called the simplified corporation. The simplified corporation is also thought for small companies, for small undertakings, but it's very easy and very flexible to set up. So it will allow you you don't need, for instance, you need for the corporation and the LLC, you do need the majority of the members of the board or the managers to be resident. In the simplified corporation, you just don't need that. You need a resident administrator, someone who who you can find and reach, but you don't need to have a majority of residents. You can have meetings by Skype, by Zoom, by any means, electronic means. The whole thing is thought to be electronic and kept in electronic files, and you can get it in just 24 hours. So it's a very flexible and usable and simple entity to use. So I explained briefly the 4 types of entities, and I have 4 minutes left, so I will be faster. So I explained briefly the 4 types of business entities: the corporation, the LLC, the branch of the foreign company, and the simplified corporation. Now let's talk about contracts. And this, type of contracts where you can sell your products from overseas and hold on. Where you can sell your products from overseas and set up a presence in Argentina. Like I said, we have a codified system that was, since the beginning of our constitution. And in 2015, we changed all the codified system of the civil code and the commercial code, and they made a new civil and commercial code. This new civil and commercial code incorporated regulations of most of the contracts designed to sell products or services in Argentina from overseas, like distribution, agency, franchising, leasing, supply, brokerage, concession, and so on and so forth. These agreements, I will not go into too much detail with any of these agreements. I will just say that they can be subject to foreign law and foreign jurisdictions, provided there's no public order or no violation of the rules of the civil and commercial code. In general, the regulations is it just adapts what was defined by the cases in the past. Finally, with regards to this type of agreements, I'd like to say that there are currently no exchange controls or banking curbs for payments overseas under this contract. So, I'm thinking, other types could be licensing for software. If you are a treaty, if we are under a treaty, a double taxation treaty with Argentina, and you register the software license in the INPI, in the National Institute of Intellectual Property, we may be able to obtain a reduced withholding on income tax. But I will describe that later when we talk about taxes very briefly. There are no restrictions to do business in Argentina as a foreigner. There are no general restrictions. In general, you will be treated the same as any other Argentine. We have executed in the 1990s a number of bilateral investment treaties, BITs, with most countries of the world, with the US, with the UK, with most EU countries, with Switzerland, Russia, Spain, Turkey, Ukraine, United Arab Emirates, and so on and so forth. And these treaties have proved to be very, very, very useful. And in fact, in the past, Argentina was subject to rules against this, based on these treaties, for many cases when we have, like I said, when we have those 15 years of populist governments that try to seize assets of foreign companies. Now, we have also a vast number of double taxation treaties with not with the US, and the 20 minutes have been up, so I will go very fast, but with Germany, with England, with Switzerland, with Spain, with Chile, Russia, Finland, UK, Austria, Netherlands, and so on. Unfortunately, not with the US, and I think this was a strategic decision from the US and from the Argentines' standpoint. We are, like I said, members of G20. We just had the G20 meeting in Argentina. The filings for OECD membership have been made, but no decision yet. There's a political, I mean, we have the 35 OECD members support, but there's something political internal within the OECD. But we follow all the OECD treaties, anti-corruption, CRS, automatic exchange of information, and so on. Not FATCA. We have no FATCA agreement with the US. There's one agreement executed in 2016, but the application of that treaty with the US for exchange of information is very, very soft, I would say. We have the apostille and the New York Convention on Recognition of Foreign Arbitral Awards. My time has been up. I will go very, very fast through taxation and compliance and AML. I would just say for companies, taxes are levied at, of course, like any other place, federal, provincial, and municipal level. At the federal level, most important taxes are income tax, value-added tax, and the tax on dividends. The large tax reform in force since January 1st, 2018 has reduced the tax rate for income tax for companies to 30% for 2018 and 25% from January 1st, 2020 onwards. The tax of the value-added tax for sales of goods and services is general. There's a general rate of 21% with certain exceptions. The tax of dividends has also been, it's a new tax created by the tax reform of December 29, 2017, in force in January 1st, 2018, provides for a tax on dividends of 7% from January 1st and 13% from January 1st to 2020 onwards. What they're trying to do is compensate the tax reduction from 35 to 30 with the tax on dividends. What they want to do is to keep income within the company and promote, incentivize investment. There are other federal taxes like tax on debits and credits, on capital gains for the transfer of shares of 15%. And there was a proviso in the tax reform of 17 in force since 2018 that provided that when inflation would be more than 30% per year, there would be one could adjust the financial statements for tax purposes by inflation. There's a debate on that because the effects of inflation on taxes is quite huge, considerable. And there's a current debate on how to deal with this situation. The discussion is not finished yet. So I will update in due course. At provincial level, we have the gross income tax, which is normally a 3% tax on the gross income, and stamp tax, which taxes the instrument like any other stamp tax, 1.5% in general, 1% depending on the provincial, and so on. Like I said, Argentina early adopter of CRS, of the Common Reporting Center, set up by the OECD, and is currently considering implementing the MDR, the mandatory disclosure requirements for gatekeepers. Another thing that brought about OECD membership was compliance, AML, and criminal liability for companies, corruption. Whether you're helping corruption or you're doing the right thing to avoid and prevent corruption, you should be liable. Now, I will just say that since March this year, we have the corporate criminal liability, and every company must have a proper anti-corruption system, manual courses, a proper system that you may not be totally immune from corruption, but you have to have done everything in your power to prevent corruption. I think my time is up. I hope you find this short introduction to doing business in Argentina useful, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you very much, and I remain at your disposal. Thank you.
Luiz Hoffman from Brazil.
Hello, let's begin. Hello guys, this is Luiz Hoffman from Brazil, São Paulo. It's a pleasure having you here today in our webinar provided by Alliant. I'd like to thank initially to Mr. Jacob Stein. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and it'll be a pleasure to be with you. So the objective here to do today is to tell you about how doing business in Brazil from a tax lawyer perspective, and we have 4 points to be discussed. Firstly, you can see my beautiful photo, my beautiful picture here. As my mother used to say, I don't think I am so beautiful as she used to tell me. My name is Luiz Augusto de Almeida Hoffman. I practiced law for around 15 years here in Brazil. And a little bit about my resume by my CV. I'm a specialist in tax law by the Pontifical Catholic University of São Paulo. I also have a PhD in civil law by the University of Camerino in Italy. And also I'm PhD in civil law by the University of São Paulo here in Brazil. I also part of the Tax Administrative Court in São Paulo. I represent the contributors from São Paulo State, and I act as a judge in this court. I am also head director of the Young Entrepreneurs Committee of the Federation of Industries of São Paulo. I have a lot of texts written. I'm an author of several lectures at the university extension courses. I'm also a teacher in an MBA course in São Caetano do Sul University. I'm fluent in English, Italian, Spanish, and I have knowledge also of German and French. And my mother language is Portuguese. That's the language we speak in Brazil. So the first point I would like to talk to you today is the overview of Brazilian economy, the political landscape and capital markets. It's just like an introduction. As you may know, we just had our elections some weeks ago. We had the candidate that won is Mr. Jair Bolsonaro. He's a right guy here in Brazil. And as you may know, we had some difficulties in the last years with our president, some problems about corruption, and some problems that brought us some stability. But I think from now, everything will be better because we have already passed these points. And I think that we will have better days, hope so. Brazil is the largest country in South America. We have 26 states plus our federal district of Brasilia, where is our capital. Brazil is member of the G20. There recently, the last days, took place the meeting about the G20 in Buenos Aires in Argentina. We are one of the BRICS countries, along with Russia, India, China, and South Africa. We have a solid and legal and economic platform for business that's very stable. Brazil is currently ranked as the world's 8th largest economy. So you know that our market will have more than 200 million persons. We have the size of about a continent, very similar to the US. And we are the most desirable country in the world for foreign direct investment, as we will see in our last point. Our Brazilian political structure, in the next slide, we have three independent branches, the executive, the legislative, and judicial one. The president is elected by direct vote for a 4-year term. The judicial branch consists of the Supreme Court, the Superior Court of Justice. They are both in Brasilia, our capital, and a network of lower federal and state courts. The legislative branch consists of state representatives, also elected for a 4-year term. And at the state level, the executive branch consists of governors elected for a 4-year term with the possibility of re-election, as from our president. And at the municipal level, the executive branch consists of mayors who are elected also for a 4-year term. So we have three kinds of governments here, the federal, the state, and the municipal ones. The Brazilian economy, the agriculture is key for economic growth and export in the Brazilian economy. Brazil is also an important producer of soybeans, corn, cotton, cocoa, tobacco, and forest products. And Brazil is the largest eucalyptus fiber producer worldwide. Brazil's proven mineral resources are extensive. Brazil has one of the most diversified manufacturing industries in the world, and the largest in Latin America. That I can tell you, especially because I'm from the board of the Federation of Industries in São Paulo, which is responsible for around 70% of Brazilian industrial GDP. So that's a lot of points that we discuss in our federation. And Brazil's non-oil reserves are ranked among the 20 largest in the world. For example, the very famous company Petrobras. Regarding our capital markets, the Brazilian financial and capital market system is a highly regulated sector, very well driven, very well conducted. The Brazilian financial is essentially composed of regulatory bodies such as the CMN, which is the National Monetary Council, and the National Council of Private Insurance. The Brazilian financial is supervised by such bodies as the Central Bank, which is very restricted, and the Brazilian Securities and Exchange Commission, the CVM. The CVM regulates, develops, controls, and inspects the securities market, and most of the relevant capital markets regulations have been issued recently by the CVM in attempt to update and modernize the Brazilian market. That's mainly what I had to tell you about our political landscape, the capital markets, and our overview of Brazilian economy, especially what I just told you about our elections and the movement. And when we will discuss about the foreign direct investment, we come back here for some discussion. The second point I'd like to tell you today is the commonly used business structures and legal entities. The possible business structures we have in Brazil is the exportation of products or services, a kind of business you may have in Brazil if you want to. Sales agents is also regulated, commercial distribution, franchise, commercial partnerships, consortium, acquisition of corporate partnership, incorporation of a Brazilian subsidiary. You may know that Brazil has the system about civil law. We don't have common law here, so we have a lot of codes, a lot of laws that regulate these issues, like especially our civil code that discuss about these issues. When you say about incorporating or acquiring a Brazilian subsidiary, of course, you have to follow all the formalities. The subsidiary incorporated will form a legal entity different from its partners. There is a clear separation between the rights and obligations of the subsidiary and the rights and obligations of its partners. So you can write, there are the agreements, and so on. We'll discuss a little bit more about it. And also assets of a subsidiary may be used only for pursuing its corporate purpose. So there is a very strict rule and direct about the companies here. So we have two most usual types of legal entities. That's pretty common also in the US. So we have the LLC, which is the limited liability company. In Brazil, we call it the Sociedade Limitada in Portuguese. We have, in this kind, more flexible structures. We have less formalities as well. There is no such big regulation as we have in the other kind of LLC. And they are visible for 4i partners. So we'll see a little bit better the following slides. And the other point, the other kind of company, most usual type, would be the corporation, which we say is the Sociedade Anônima. The corporation may issue actions. There is a higher protection in case there are different groups of shareholders, and the shares can be negotiated in the stock market. Listed companies must adopt compulsory this form and are subject to the ruling of the CVM, which is the body that I have told you before. The legal entities, they have to be registered for control and fiscalization, and the bodies, as you may see, we have here the Board of Trade, the Federal Revenue, and since we have the three kinds of governments, also from the federal, municipal, and state government, we have to do this registration. And of course, depending on the activity, you have to do a register also in specific bodies according to the activity. When you say about doing the registration a company before the Board of Trade, it's mandatory. You cannot have a company without doing the register. Partners must draft the articles of association of the bylaws. There is no obligation about doing the shareholders agreement, but of course you need to do it because some issues you don't want to make it public about managing and about profit sharings and so on. So some discussions, they don't go, the shareholders agreement, it's not compulsory to be registered, but of course you should do it. You should sign a shareholders agreement. For our companies, need a Brazilian legal representative and a manager to represent them. And sometimes you don't have to do it, but you need to send a big amount of money and you have to generate a lot of employment. So usually it's easier for you to have a local attorney, representative, and a manager here. And of course, the company has obligations as definition of corporate purpose, address, resolution quorums, capital, management bodies, administration, corporate capital, among others. So these were the two kinds of companies, the most usual types of legal entities we have, which is the LLC and the corporation. So this was our second point. Now we have another point, the third one, which is an introduction to Brazilian legal system and taxation. This issue, this matter, as a matter of fact, is very complex, and I would never be able to explain you all details, and because but I will make you a very quickly resume about how is our legal system, our taxation. Our legal system, I told you that we have this civil law. We don't have the common law, and the Brazilian Constitution defines as the powers of the Union, the legislative, executive, and judiciary branches as independent and harmonious. Our taxation is mainly regulated by the 1988 Federal Constitution, the National Tax Code of 1966, and the Federal Income Tax Code. These points regarding the federal tax that there are. We have also the state tax and we have the municipal ones. Tax are payable by all private business entities resident in Brazil, including corporations, limited liability companies, partnerships and sole partnerships, branches and agencies of corporations. Tax are levied by the federal, state, and municipal governments, as I told you. And Brazil has a complex system of corporate taxation, which the federal government levies are. So these 9 points, they are the only related to the federal government taxes. So you have the corporate income tax, you have the social contribution tax on profit, you have the federal value added or excise tax on manufactured goods, you have financial transaction tax, excise tax on cross-border royalties and services, social security financial tax on revenue, social integration program tax on revenue, employer social security contributions, and rural property tax. I didn't want to make you tired about hearing all these points, but of course, when you come to Brazil, when you do a foreign direct investment, you need to make a tax study, a planning, you need to have a local lawyer to work together with your local lawyer. So that's, I think, the point about it's complex, but it's doable. So if you make a study, you can go move on. Regarding municipalities and the federal district charges tax on services, urban property, and transfer of urban real estate. And the residence of a company in Brazil is determined based on whether the company has been incorporated in accordance with Brazilian law. The next slide, where you can see now, is related to tax and financial incentives. The tax and financial incentives aid companies to make their business more profitable once it affects directly in the company's results. Brazil has development agencies that provided approximately 165 billion reais in 2015. So investment project financing is granted under, of course, special terms and conditions. So regarding financial incentives and tax incentives, should be made a study also by a lawyer to see if there is an issue about possibility. Labor registration is also, its taxes, it's also a complex matter here in Brazil. So labor relations are governed by a law. It's the consolidated labor laws and numerous complementary laws and regulations. It lists a variety of labor entitlements, including maternity leave, vacation, workers' compensation, social services, medical assistance, and employment benefits. So the 4 point is the do's and don'ts of direct foreign investment in Brazil. And that's very interesting when you say about, oh, a Brazilian lawyer will tell me the don'ts of foreign investment in Brazil. Of course, I will tell you the truth. That's the point here, to give you a presentation about how you do. But of course, it depends on your activity, what you want to do, how you want to invest. But Brazil is a safe place for investment. We have a very stable currency. Sometimes go a little bit up, sometimes go down, but we have a very inflation that is very controlled by several, I think, almost decades by now. Or since 1994, we have a very stable inflation and then a very stable currency. So I don't think there is a problem. And the next slide, when we begin this last point, we say about that the corporate taxpayer identification is also required. That's not something complex, not even complicated. We can do that for you. Once you own certain properties or rights in Brazil. We have the Brazilian Central Bank is in charge of monitoring and regulating foreign exchange transactions. And the National Monetary Council sets Brazil's exchange controls. The Brazilian Central Bank guidelines allow legal entities and individuals to purchase and sell foreign currency and perform international transfers. And the Brazilian Central Bank registers all investments, whether in the form of capital or in the form of loans. And when you submit back the money or the loan, you have to go through the central bank, through the Brazilian Central Bank again. So it registers all the money that comes and the money that goes back to the countries. And the exchange contract must be made through a financial institution authorized by Brazilian Central Bank to operate in exchange. Speaking a little bit, coming back from our introduction that I told you that I would come back here. We have in Brazil diversified productive structure. We are the largest producer in Latin America. We are one of the world's leading producers and exporters of commodities. We are the second largest food exporter. Energy metrics based on renewable resources, since we are almost a continent. And Brazil is competing with emerging companies such as India, China, and South America and South Africa. As you may see from this edition about the economists, Brazil in the first decade of the 2000s had very big growth. The macroeconomic, we have a very fiscal balance, a price stability, and foreign trade surplus. I think now the objective about the new government will be to make some reforms, as we will see discussed by now. Social credit access and wage growth, foreign trade, agro and mineral commodities, outstanding performance, and regarding infrastructure, renewable resources as the basis for the energy metrics. So we had some problems on this decade, but now I think, as I told you, we are going through. The main partners by trade flow, as you can see, in the 2000 were the United States with 23.5%, Argentina second one, Germany the third one, and you can see that change a little bit in 2017, when we had China with 20% and United States with 14%. As you can see, that's very interesting. This slide, you can see the inflow of foreign direct investment in US billions. 2012, 86, then you will see 2014, almost $100 billion about foreign direct investment. It went a little bit down, especially because 2014 we had the elections, and the main investors in 2017 were the United States and almost together with the Netherlands. They live very much more below the Germany. The pillars now about our nowadays for our growth are the structural reforms. We had a labor reform 1 year ago. Now we have for the public insurance. We will have for one the beginning of the year, very luckily. Regulatory environment improvement, more friendly business environment that we are very willing to do it, and there will be a lot of opportunities in concessions, public management, and private-public partnerships, and a lot of privatization as well. Brazil, as you can see, the investment, gross fixed capital formation, the investment rate as of GDP, our target will be 25%. You can see that we're a little bit better in 2017 from the past year, and now we are growing again. Unfortunately, our labor cost is still too high since we have a lot of benefits and taxes regarding this point. You can see that we only lose to Belgium, we have around 30%. And you can see also here the evolution of a Brazilian trade result. Our forecast in 2018 will be for this year, 2018 will be $55 billion. Our exports concentration now are in basic products. Used to be in airplanes in the 2000s. We have a very big company in Breyer here, but nowadays it's soybean, IOR, oil, sugarcane, and passenger car. Our volume of foreign reserves is growing each year. You can see that we're only $54 billion in 2005. Now we have almost $400 billion. Brazil, and especially São Paulo, as you can see from this slide, is a hub for the whole South America. As you can see, it's always airline hub. There are a lot of flights here. Countries, we have countries according to the president of Brazilian companies. We have number of 40 companies here in the US. Brazilian companies by the number of foreign subsidiaries, and here we have 10 big companies that have these foreign subsidiaries. And as you can see also from this slide, the geographical distribution of Brazilian multinationals, we are almost all over the world. As you can see, from more than 30 companies, you can see the number of countries. So I'd like to thank you for your patience about listening to me. It's been a pleasure to talk to you. These are my contacts, my mail, the number for my law firm. Thank you very much, and it was a pleasure. Bye-bye.